In this exercise, you're not only going to use input boxes, but you'll also use loops and if statements, as well as a message box at the end. So to follow along, go ahead and open up the input box file in the resources section for this lecture. Okay, now that you have the file open, I'm going to demonstrate what's going to happen first. Now my file here is fully functional, yours won't have the code in it. I'm going to walk through the code with you. So I'm taking a look here at sales for a fictitious restaurant called Best Restaurant that I made up. And I've got different services: breakfast service, lunch, dinner, and brunch. So I just happen to put a button inside of the sales for March that's going to calculate the profits for me. Now what I want to do is I want to calculate the profits, but just for different services, like calculate the profits for breakfast, lunch, dinner, or brunch. So let me show you how this works. I'll go ahead and click on Calculate Profits, and that's going to bring up my input box. And you see here that I have a prompt and it says enter the meal service. Now not only does it bring up the input box, but since I'm calculating profits here, it actually sets my profits, my total, back to 0. Alright, so for instance, if I say that I want to calculate lunch, and again this is across 3 months here, I'll go ahead and type in lunch, and when I click OK, what the code is going to do is it's going to look in the A column, in the first column. It's going to look for lunch, and it's going to look for lunch on every single worksheet. When it finds lunch, it's then going to go to the E column, which is the profit column. It's going to take the number there and store it, go to the next tab, find lunch, go to the E column, take that number, add it to the first number, and then go to the last tab, find lunch, take the number from profit, add that, and then add them all together. So when I click on OK, there's my number. There's my total sales for lunch. Alright, so let me show you how this is done. I'll click on OK to close that. And I'll switch over to Visual Basic by clicking on Alt F11 on the keyboard. First, I have a procedure called Meal Service Sales. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to declare some variables. I'm going to declare a variable that's going to store whatever service, like breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or brunch, that someone puts into the input box. I'm going to declare the total number as a currency. Since I'm going sheet by sheet here to find the numbers, I'm going to declare sheet as a worksheet. And because I need to tell Excel what row to go to find that service, I'm going to go ahead and declare the number for that row as well. So I am going to declare meal service as a string, total as currency, sheet as worksheet, and R is going to be a byte. And again, that's the number for my row. Alright, now I'm going to start with the total as being 0. Remember, I told you that when the input box pops up, it's going to set the total back to 0. And whatever someone enters into the input box, that is going to be the meal service that we're looking for. So I am going to assign the input box value to meal service. So I've got meal service, my assignment operator, and then input box will be enter the meal service. All right. So next I need to start a loop. I need this code to go worksheet by worksheet by worksheet and pull out that number for me. So I'm going to start a for each loop. And remember, you can use for each loops when you're working with collections. So I will type in here for each sheet that's in the worksheets collection. And what I like to do here is after I start my for each, I always like to put in my next. So I'll type in next sheet, and then I'll put in the code inside of that. So I like to put in my wrapper first, basically. All right, so all the different lunch services start at row 5. Let me show you. I'll switch back here to Excel. You can see they go from rows 5 down to rows 8. All right, so heading back to my code, I need to now tell Excel to start at row 5. So I'll type in here another 4. I'll say for R, and I'll assign that to 5 to 8. And since I'm doing a nested for here, I'm just going to go ahead and close this up by putting in my next R. All right, so here's the good part. Here's what's next. So remember, someone put the meal service into the input box, and right now it's being held, it's being stored. So what I'm going to tell VBA to do next is to take a look at whatever someone typed in the meal service. And if that is in, at this point, A5, then to add that to the total. So this is how that's going to look. I'll type in if sheet dot cells, so I'm using cells here, R comma 1. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, right now, remember, R means 5. So I'm in my 5th row, first column. I'm in A5 right now. So in this line, I'm saying if whatever is in meal service right now is the same as the value in A5, then do what? Well, then go over to column E and take that number and add it to the total. So that's going to look like this. The total, which right now when we're starting off is 0, plus whatever row we're in, column E's value. So right now it'd be 0 plus whatever's inside of E5. All right, and then it's going to go to the next sheet. It's going to look for the service in the next sheet, whatever row that's on. When it finds it, it's going to go over to the E column, which is the profit, and it's going to add that to that total. And then it's just going to keep going until it runs out of sheets. All right, so the last thing that I want to do here is to add in my message box after I've looped through all of the rows and I've looped through all of the sheets. So what I'll do after this next sheet here down at the bottom is I'll go ahead and put in my message box. So remember, it said total sales for, and then it had whatever the meal service was. In my example, I had lunch, is, and then the total. So I'll go ahead and type that in. And actually, before I do anything, let me go ahead and close my end if there. All right, so let me go ahead now and test this out. I have, again, my enter meal service. This time I will put in dinner and click on OK. And there's my total for dinner. All right, so here you used a lot of elements from the course. Again, you used message boxes, input boxes, loops, and if statements. So I actually have an exercise for you now. What I want you to do is to create something very similar, and you can actually use a lot of the code that you've just put in. What I want you to do here is instead of adding up the total profit for each service, I want you to add up the total sales for each restaurant. So the Main Street restaurant and the Laguna Street restaurant.